Hello, dear friend. It is so wonderful to have you here in this quiet sanctuary of books and more. We believe that even in our fast-paced lives, we shouldn't lose the profound wisdom hidden within great books. That's why we are here, to distill the original, core ideas of masterpieces, helping you save your precious time while ensuring you never miss the depths and resonance of the author's true message. Today, we turn our gaze toward a subject that shapes every breath of our collective lives, the intricate world of politics. But this is not a story of dry laws or distant leaders. It is a journey through the very soul of human society, a breathtaking tapestry of big ideas that have built civilizations and redefined our destiny. Have you ever paused to ask where the true boundary lies between power and your own personal freedom? Why do visions of a perfectly just society still haunt our dreams after thousands of years? And amidst the immense, ever-moving gears of history, how does one individual truly find their place? Exploring these grand questions is often a way to heal our own confusion about the world. It reminds us that we are not alone in our search for meaning, but part of a long, courageous human lineage. Understanding the past is how we find the strength to build a kinder, more thoughtful future. May the insights we share today bring a sense of clarity to your mind and peace to your heart. I invite you now to step into this journey of discovery with me. Let's begin. Understanding the nature and evolution of political thought. If everyone could have everything they wanted whenever they wanted, there would be no such thing as politics. Human experience simply never provides us with every resource we desire, and because of this, we are forced to compete, struggle, and find ways to compromise. This reality is what gave birth to political language, a necessary tool to explain and justify our claims while answering the claims of others. Whether we use the language of individual interests or the language of values like rights, liberty, and justice, these concepts help us defend our place in the world. I see this complex activity as much more than just a struggle over who gets what, where, and how. The ancient Greek thinker Aristotle taught that it is natural for man to live politically. He argued that politics is not merely a response to scarcity, but a noble activity where we decide the rules we will live by and the goals we will collectively pursue. This approach, known as political moralism, treats political life as a branch of ethics. For moralists, our social arrangements should be organized to protect substantial goals like justice, equality, and fraternity. At its most radical, this line of thinking produces utopias, descriptions of ideal societies that serve as a process of striving towards something better, even though such visions have sometimes been used to justify historical violence. However, another major tradition rejects the idea that politics exists to deliver moral values. Realists argue that politics is fundamentally about power. In their view, power is the essential means by which ends are achieved, enemies are defeated, and compromises are sustained. Without the ability to exercise power, even the most noble values are useless. Thinkers such as Niccolò Machiavelli and Thomas Hobbes, who both lived through periods of deep civil disorder, remind us that human nature can be fickle and that the state of nature is often a war of all against all. For them, a sovereign must exercise absolute power to save society from its own brutish instincts. We must also recognize the rise of ideology, a way of thinking that emphasizes how ideas are tied to specific historical periods and social classes. Philosophers like Hegel and Marx explained that the significance of certain ideas changes across history as institutions and practices evolve. This led to the great isms of the modern world, such as communism, socialism, and fascism. While these frameworks provide structure, they also face criticism. Some worry that when politics becomes a purely ideological struggle, passion replaces reason, and the ends are seen to justify brutal or unjust means. As I look toward the future, I am reminded of Hegel's observation that the owl of Minerva only takes flight at twilight. This means that true understanding often comes only in retrospect. It is easy to view ourselves as the most progressive age, but we cannot truly predict how we will appear to future generations. The last few decades have seen a strange tension between the rise of new nation-states and the move toward complex federations and globalization. To make sense of our present, we must understand the variety of political theories conceived throughout history. These ideas explain our current possibilities and warn us against overconfidence in our own values. Because new ways of exercising power will always emerge, we must remain engaged in the debate about how that power is controlled and held accountable. Ancient political thought, the quest for the good life and the just state. In the centuries before the Common Era, specifically between 800 BCE and 30 CE, I see the very first ripples of what we now call political theory. It began with a fundamental shift in human consciousness in ancient China and Greece. Thinkers started to look beyond the heavens and myths to ask a groundbreaking question: how should we organize our societies to ensure not just survival, but a life that is truly good? At first, this wasn't seen as a separate field. It was simply a part of moral philosophy or ethics. These early philosophers examined the structure of society to find the best way to foster happiness and security for everyone. My exploration of this period begins in China during the spring and autumn period. This was a time of relative prosperity and scholarship that gave rise to the 100 schools of thought. The most towering figure of this era was undoubtedly Confucius. He developed a framework for a just government based on traditional moral values rather than raw force. I believe his most significant contribution was the idea of the Junzi, or the superior man. This was a ruler or administrator who led by example. Confucius taught that if a leader's desire is for good, the people will be good. He used a beautiful metaphor to explain this. The moral character of the ruler is the wind, and that of the subjects is the grass. When the wind blows, the grass must bend. For Confucius, the state was like a large family, held together by 5 constant relationships and the principle of reciprocity. He was innovative in suggesting that a meritocratic class of scholars should advise the hereditary rulers, ensuring that those in power were the most able and educated. Shortly after Confucius, I find another fascinating thinker named Mozi. While he agreed with the idea of meritocracy, he felt Confucius was too tied to the traditions of noble families. Mozi proposed that administrators should be chosen purely for their aptitude and virtue, regardless of their background. He envisioned a society built on universal love, where a strong and ethical system of government would unite people under a coherent moral code. However, as China moved into the more violent warring states period, these idealistic views were challenged by the legalists, such as Han Fei-tzu. They took a much darker, more cynical view of human nature, arguing that people act only out of self-interest. To them, the only way to control this was through strict laws, harsh punishments, and a focus on the well-being of the state over the rights of the individual. During this same era of conflict, the military general Sun Tzu applied the tactics of warfare to the business of the state. In his famous work, The Art of War, he made it clear that military strategy and intelligence were critical elements of governance. For Sun Tzu, a stable and prosperous state was one that knew how to defend itself and punish those who threatened it. Yet he shared with Confucius the belief that a ruler should lead by example and that war should always be a last resort. He famously argued that the best victory is the one won without a single shot fired, often through deception and superior intelligence. Across the world in Greece, a different kind of political experiment was unfolding. In the city-state of Athens, a form of democracy had been established where citizens participated directly in government. This environment produced Socrates, whose constant questioning of justice and virtue eventually led to his death sentence. This tragedy profoundly influenced his student, Plato. In his masterpiece, The Republic, Plato expressed a deep suspicion of democracy, which he saw as a path toward disorder and eventually despotism. He argued that the role of rulers is to ensure the people follow the good life, and that this requires an intellectual ability that only philosophers possess. To explain why philosophers should lead, he used the metaphor of the ship of state. Just as a ship owner with no knowledge of the sea needs a skilled navigator to steer a proper course, a state needs a philosopher king to rule justly. Plato even suggested that these leaders should be separated from their families and reared in communes so their only loyalty would be to the state. I see a shift toward a more practical approach in the work of Plato's pupil, Aristotle. He famously stated that man is by nature a political animal. For Aristotle, it is our innate power of reason and speech that drives us to form social groups and city-states. He believed the purpose of these communities is to enable us to live according to virtue. Unlike Plato, who reasoned theoretically about an ideal state, Aristotle analyzed hundreds of existing regimes to find out what actually worked. He identified 6 types of government that came in pairs: monarchy and its corrupt form tyranny, aristocracy and its corrupt form oligarchy, and finally polity and its corrupt form democracy. Aristotle concluded that a polity, a form of constitutional government, was the most practical way to run a state. He believed that while an individual might lack the wisdom of a great ruler, the collective many might actually prove to be better guardians of liberty. As I look toward India, I encounter Chanakya, a thinker who helped transform the subcontinent into a unified empire. His work, the Arthashastra, is a remarkably dispassionate and sometimes ruthless analysis of politics. Chanakya believed in a pragmatic approach, where the welfare of the people was the ultimate goal, but he didn't flinch from describing how to use underhanded methods like espionage and assassination to maintain power. He saw the state as a chariot that needs 2 wheels to move, the sovereign and the ministers. For Chanakya, governance was only possible with assistance, and he warned that a single wheel cannot move the state forward. Finally, the period of ancient political thoughts concludes with the rise of Rome and the contributions of Cicero. He was a staunch defender of the Roman Republic and its mixed constitution, which combined elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. Cicero believed that this balance was the only way to provide stability and prevent the government from being bandied about like a ball between different factions. He warned that without these checks and balances, power would inevitably pass from a king to a tyrant, then to the people, and finally to oligarchs in a destructive cycle. When I look back at these ancient foundations, I am struck by how many of our modern debates were already taking shape. Whether it was the Chinese focus on virtue and merit, the Greek search for the best form of government, or the Roman emphasis on checks and balances, these early thinkers set the stage for everything that followed. They taught us that the way we choose to live together is not just a matter of convenience, but a reflection of our deepest values and our shared search for justice. These ideas were the first steps on a long journey to understand the complex and often messy reality of political life. Medieval politics, the struggle between faith and the state. As I look back at the 1,000-year span between the 1st century and the early 1500s, I see a political landscape that was fundamentally reshaped by the power of belief. For centuries, the Roman Empire had dominated the known world with its emphasis on stability and imperial culture. But as the empire began to crumble, 2 new forces emerged that would define the Middle Ages: Christianity in Europe and Islam in the Middle East. During this long era, Political thinking was rarely a separate field of study. Instead, it was deeply woven into the fabric of religious theology. One of the first significant voices I encounter in this period is Augustine of Hippo. Living as the Roman world was falling apart, Augustine asked a question that still rings true today. If justice is taken away, what are governments but great bands of robbers? He believed that while we all desire order and peace, most human societies are inherently sinful. He distinguished between the city of God and the city of earth, arguing that the church must influence the state to ensure that the laws of the land are aligned with divine law. Augustine also began to think seriously about the morality of conflict, introducing the idea of a just war, a war fought not for glory or plunder, but to restore peace and defend the innocent. While Europe was entering what many call the Dark Ages, a different political tradition was taking root in Arabia. Muhammad was not only the prophet of Islam, but also a sophisticated political and military leader. He created the Constitution of Medina, which I consider one of the world's first formal constitutions. It established a unified state that recognized the rights and duties of different religious groups, obliging them to fight as one if the community was threatened. This Islamic influence grew rapidly, and unlike the early Christian world, it remained very open to secular political thinking. In Baghdad, scholars in the House of Wisdom preserved and translated the works of Plato and Aristotle. I find the work of Al-Farabi particularly fascinating here. He used Greek philosophy to imagine a model state ruled by a virtuous leader, a philosopher prophet, who could guide his people to true happiness. Back in Europe, the 13th century brought a monumental shift in the way we think about the power of rulers. In 1215, the barons of King John forced him to sign the Magna Carta. This document was a turning point because it established that no free man should be imprisoned except by the law of the land. It was a clear, bold statement that even the king was subject to the law. It pioneered the idea that the freedom of the individual must be protected from the arbitrary abuse of power, laying the groundwork for the parliaments and bills of rights we see today. Around this same time, the Italian scholar Thomas Aquinas was performing a different kind of intellectual heavy lifting. He sought to reconcile Christian theology with the rational arguments of the newly rediscovered Aristotle. Aquinas believed that the universe is ruled by an eternal, divine law, but he also argued that humans have a unique gift, the power of reason. Through reason, we can deduce natural law, which guides our moral behavior. For Aquinas, justice was the prime political virtue. He argued that laws are only legitimate if they are based on reason and serve the common good. If a law is unjust or serves only the interests of the ruler, he believed it should not be considered a law at all. He also refined the theory of just war, insisting that it could only be waged under the authority of a sovereign, with a just cause and a rightful intention to restore peace. As the Middle Ages began to wane, new challenges to the authority of the Church emerged. I see this clearly in the writings of Marsilius of Padua. As an academic, he was able to speak more openly than the clergy, and he argued that the Church should devote itself entirely to spiritual matters and give up its secular power. He believed that effective government should originate with the people, and that management of human affairs is best conducted through legislation made by the people themselves. This was a radical departure from the idea of divine right and a significant step toward the secular states of the modern era. I also must highlight the brilliant insights of the North African thinker Ibn Khaldun. He looked at politics through the lens of history and sociology, focusing on the concept of asabiya, or community spirit. He observed that this social cohesion is what allows governments to form and prevent injustice. However, He also identified a recurring cycle where societies become more civilized, their leaders become more opulent and self-interested, and they eventually collapse to make way for a new, more cohesive group. He was ahead of his time in recognizing the economic consequences of overtaxation and the inherent dangers of a decadent ruling elite. Finally, we reach the end of this period with Niccolò Machiavelli, a man whose name has become synonymous with manipulation, though I believe his work is often misunderstood. Writing during the turbulent Renaissance in Florence, Machiavelli moved away from the idea that politics should be a branch of moral philosophy. He wanted to look at the effectual truth of how things really are, not how we imagine they should be. In The Prince, he proposed that the well-being and security of the state are the primary responsibilities of a ruler. If that required deceit or the use of force, he argued it was justifiable for the common good. By divorcing morality and ideology from the actual practice of governing, Machiavelli effectively launched modern political science. This long journey through medieval politics shows us a world in constant tension between the sacred and the secular. It was a time when the roots of democracy, human rights, and political realism were all being nourished by a complex mix of religious faith and rational inquiry. These thinkers left us with the enduring lesson that for a society to prosper, it must find a way to balance power with justice and law with the common good. These questions remain at the very heart of our political lives today. Rationality and Enlightenment, the birth of modern political thought. The roots of the modern political world are buried deep in the scholarship of what I call the Age of Reason. This period, following the Middle Ages in Europe, saw a fundamental shift in how we understand power and society. A combination of factors, including the invention of the printing press, the rise of nation-states, and the discovery of the Americas, influenced the transition away from religious dogma toward pure reason. I see this era as starting with a profound questioning of religious orthodoxy, famously prompted by Martin Luther in 1517. In the absence of a single religious authority to dictate order, people needed a new way to organize and legitimize political life. In France, I look at the work of the jurist Jean Bodin, who argued for a strong central power with absolute sovereignty. Having lived through the French Wars of Religion, Bodin was terrified by the chaos of competing power structures like the church and the nobility. He believed that to avoid conflict, a single sovereign must hold absolute and perpetual power. While he believed this power came from God, he insisted the sovereign must be free to make and break laws for the Commonwealth to prosper. This idea became an intellectual pillar for the rise of absolute monarchy. However, a different approach emerged from the school of Salamanca. Theologians like Francisco de Vitoria and Francisco Suarez began to use rationality to interpret human rights. Vitoria was one of the first to criticize colonial conquests, arguing that all humans share the same nature and therefore the same rights to life and liberty, regardless of their faith. Suarez went further by distinguishing between man-made laws and natural laws, eventually introducing the notion of a social contract. He proposed that a ruler governs by the consent of the people, who have a legitimate right to withdraw that consent if the ruler fails to respect natural law. Perhaps the most famous and stark articulation of the social contract comes from Thomas Hobbes. Writing during the bloody English Civil War, Hobbes portrayed the theoretical state of nature as a terrible world where everyone was at war with everyone else. In his view, life in this state was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To avert a descent into such chaos, he argued that rational men must enter into a social contract and submit to an absolute ruler with indivisible power. For Hobbes, the chief evil was an unlimited government, but he saw it as a necessary evil to keep the destructive impulses of individuals in check. I contrast this with the views of Johannes Althusius, who paved the way for modern federalism. He rejected absolute sovereignty as repressive and argued that power should move upward through various associations, from families to cities to states. In his theory, sovereignty belongs to the people, and government is simply a part of a symbiotic social contract meant to protect those people. This focus on human agency was shared by Hugo Grotius, whom I consider the father of international law. Grotius placed liberty and rights firmly in the possession of individuals, arguing that these were intrinsic qualities and not gifts from a sovereign. The Enlightenment reached a new peak with John Locke, who articulated the liberal principles that still define many of our societies. Unlike Hobbes, Locke believed that the state of nature could be relatively harmonious but lacked a neutral judge to settle disputes. He argued that the purpose of government and law was to preserve and enlarge human freedom, specifically protecting our natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Locke's insistence that government can only rule with the consent of the people and that we have a right to revolt against illegitimate rule provided the intellectual foundation for many modern revolutions. I also examined the architectural design of government through Montesquieu. He recognized that anyone with power is likely to abuse it, so he advocated for a separation of powers. By dividing administrative duties into executive, legislative, and judicial branches, he believed a balance could be created where each body restricts the others from becoming too powerful. Finally, I look at the practical side of these ideals through Benjamin Franklin. He saw that the health of a nation depends on the virtue of its citizens. He believed that independent, hard-working entrepreneurs were the real driving force of society, and that a prosperous nation is built on individual productivity rather than the privileges of an unproductive aristocracy. Human rights, checks and balances, international law, and representative democracy are all modern concepts that were first truly explored by the thinkers of this age. They moved beyond the guidance of others to use their own intelligence, creating the framework for the political world we inhabit today. Revolutionary thoughts: the era of ideals, upheaval, and the birth of modern liberty. The transition from the scientific progress of the 17th century to the political explosions of the late 18th century marks one of the most vibrant chapters in human history. I see this era as a great intellectual movement that aimed to clear away centuries of scholasticism and reform society using the power of reason. This was a time when the early efforts of thinkers like Hobbes and Locke to rationalize social structures were taken up and sometimes subverted by a new generation of writers who believed that the people, not monarchs, were the true source of sovereignty. I must begin with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose voice resonates with a radical new view of how politics could function. Rousseau turned the ideas of his predecessors on their heads. While Hobbes saw the state of nature as a war of all against all, Rousseau viewed it in a romantic light, a time of innocence where humans were free and happy. He famously stated that man was born free, but was everywhere in chains. For him, the advent of private property was the moment harmony ended and inequality began. In his version of the social contract, the state should not be a burden but a positive extension of our freedom. He introduced the concept of the general will, suggesting that we find our true humanity by obeying laws we prescribe to ourselves. This wasn't just theory, it became a movement for the masses, inspiring the very people who would eventually storm the Bastille. As these ideas crossed the Atlantic, I see them crystallized in the American Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, heavily influenced by Locke and the radicalism of Thomas Paine, articulated the then staggering idea that all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson added a layer of republicanism that made a clean break from the old world of absolute monarchies and corrupt oligarchies. Yet, I am always struck by the paradox of Jefferson's own life, a man who owned slaves while writing the most influential defense of human freedom. Thomas Paine brought a unique, fiery energy to this period. His pamphlets, like Common Sense, demanded a total break from the British Empire. He argued that virtue is not hereditary and therefore monarchy is fundamentally unnatural. Paine believed every generation has the right to remake its political institutions as it sees fit. His later work, The Rights of Man, defended the French Revolution against the sharp criticisms of Edmund Burke. I view Edmund Burke as the necessary counterweight to this revolutionary zeal. Burke was one of the first to provide a cogent criticism of the violence in France. He argued that society is like a complex organism that grows over time, inheriting traditions and habits that shouldn't be destroyed overnight. For Burke, the social contract is a partnership between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born. He warned that ignoring tradition and relying on abstract rights would lead to bloodshed and terror, a prediction that earned him a reputation as a seer when the Reign of Terror actually occurred. During this same era, James Madison was working on the practical architecture of the new American state. While he shared the Enlightenment's belief in natural rights, his approach was more pragmatic. He was nervous about the power of the majority, which he famously described as potentially being nothing more than mob rule. He formulated the Bill of Rights as a protective barrier to ensure that the majority could not trample on the rights and property of the minority. I must also highlight the groundbreaking work of Mary Wollstonecraft. Writing in 1792, she pointed out the glaring omission in the Enlightenment's talk of rights, half of humanity. She argued that women are not intellectually inferior by nature, but by the lack of education. For her, respectable women were often the most oppressed because they were conditioned to rely on sexual allure rather than being granted the autonomy to earn their own living. She proposed that the rejuvenation of the world could only happen if women were truly free and educated. In Britain, I see Jeremy Bentham taking a much more mathematical approach to society. He dismissed the idea of natural laws as nonsense and instead proposed utilitarianism. For Bentham, morality and public policy should be simplified to one question: does an action produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number? He viewed laws as necessary evils and argued that government should act like a doctor, only intervening when it is certain that the treatment will do more good than harm. This period also saw the rise of a new kind of identity. Johann Gottfried Herder argued that each nationality contains its own center of happiness. He believed that a community is forged by a national spirit, or Volksgeist, which emerges from shared language and customs. While this was intended to celebrate cultural diversity, I recognize that it also laid the groundwork for the rising tide of nationalism that would sweep through Europe in the 19th century. I cannot conclude this summary without mentioning Georg Hegel. His complex philosophy explored the development of human consciousness. Through his famous master-slave dialectic, he showed that our sense of self is a social process. He argued that the slave, through work, actually achieves a form of self-realization that the idle master cannot hope to emulate. Hegel saw freedom not as a lack of law, but as something only possible within a fully developed civil society. Finally, the era of 1770 to 1848 was also marked by the harsh realities of power and war. Karl von Clausewitz reminded us that war is never just an adventure, it is a political act, the continuation of policy by other means. In South America, Simón Bolívar fought for the independence of new republics, though he eventually realized that large states were prone to decay and despotism. When I look back at these decades, I see the crucible in which our modern political language was formed. It was a time of immense optimism and deep fear, where the struggle between liberty and authority was fought not just with pens, but with swords. These thinkers collectively shifted the axis of the world, teaching us that society can be reshaped for the better, but also warning us of the chaos that ensues when we forget the complexity of human nature and tradition. The Rise of the Masses, 1848 to 1910. The revolutions of 1848 swept across Europe like a storm, leaving behind a world that would never be the same. Although many of those uprisings failed to achieve their immediate goals, they signaled a profound shift in the political landscape. I see this era as the moment when politics moved out of the narrow circles of the elite and into the hands of the great mass of the people. Driven by industrialization and the rapid growth of railways and telecommunications, a new social force had emerged, the industrial working class. For the first time, millions were joining political organizations and demanding a say in how they were governed. At the heart of this transformation were the ideas of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. In their Communist Manifesto, they pointed to a new class of propertyless workers who, despite gaining some political freedom, were suffering under a form of economic slavery. I find Marx's analysis of capitalism particularly ambitious because it sought to uncover the very laws governing human history. He developed the concept of alienated labor, describing how workers in a capitalist system become disconnected from what they produce, from their own human identity, and from one another. To Marx, communism was the solution to this riddle, a way to reconnect humanity by abolishing private property and returning the worker to himself as a social being. However, the rise of these socialist ideas was met with deep suspicion by others. Alexis de Tocqueville warned that socialism might simply be a new system of serfdom. He feared that by focusing on material passions and the generation of wealth, socialism would ignore the loftiest human virtues and stifle individual initiative. To Tocqueville, democracy and socialism were opposites. While democracy enhances personal autonomy, he believed socialism reduces it. I see a similar concern for the individual in the works of John Stuart Mill. He famously defended individuality as the foundation of a healthy society, but he also identified a new danger, the tyranny of the majority. Mill warned that even an elected government could become oppressive if it sought to enforce a social tyranny of public opinion. He argued that society should only interfere with individual liberty to prevent harm to others, a principle that remains a cornerstone of liberal thought. The era also saw a radicalization of the concept of property. While Pierre-Joseph Proudhon famously declared that property is theft, arguing that it undermines the fundamental rights to liberty and equality, the anarchist Mikhail Bakunin took the critique of authority even further. Bakunin believed that the privileged man is a man depraved in intellect and heart. He argued that all authority, whether of the state or religion, must be rejected for humans to be truly free and fulfilled. He even rejected universal suffrage, seeing it as just another way for the state to impose its laws and enslave the people. In the United States, the struggle for mass participation took the form of a bloody civil war. Abraham Lincoln's assertion that no man is good enough to govern another without that other's consent became a rallying call for the North. He argued that the foundation of the nation on individual liberty overrode the right of states to maintain their own laws regarding slavery. This was a pivotal moment where the Republic was rebuilt on the principles of liberty and equality rather than political convenience. As the century progressed, the demand for inclusion expanded to include half of the human race. In Britain, Emmeline Pankhurst and the suffragettes engaged in militant action and civil disobedience to win the vote for women. Pankhurst's grim choice that either women were to be killed or women were to have the vote showed an implacable determination to claim the moral authority of a just cause. Meanwhile, in the realm of social welfare, Beatrice Webb was arguing for a welfare state that would provide protection against unemployment and illness. She believed that a nation could not be saved if its workers were allowed to decay in squalor, and that social problems could only be solved by benevolent planners administering society in the best interests of all. Near the end of this period, the very foundations of morality and social order were challenged by Friedrich Nietzsche. He spoke of the will to power as the endless striving after higher goals that motivates human behavior. Nietzsche railed against what he called slave morality, which he believed had replaced the life-affirming virtues of strength and vitality with a celebratory view of weakness and meekness. I see his work as a radical call for the individual to master himself and seek his own truths, rather than being trapped by the preferences of ancient aristocratic or religious orders. As we moved into the early 20th century, the rise of the industrial masses led Max Weber to provide a new approach to studying society. He described the individual as a single cog in an ever-moving, rationalized mechanism. Weber noted that while social structures and collective understandings like religion provide order, they can also act as constraints that limit human freedom. Finally, I must recognize that the rise of the masses was not just a Western phenomenon. In Japan, Ito Hirobumi helped draft the Meiji Constitution to provide a central axis for his nation's modernization. In Latin America, José Martí warned that the disdain of a formidable neighbor like the US was the greatest danger to the region's hard-won independence. And Theodor Herzl, convinced that assimilation would never end anti-Semitism, began the movement for a Jewish state. This era, from 1848 to 1910, was a time of immense growth and conflict, where the voices of the many finally began to drown out the voices of the few, setting the stage for the ideological clashes that would dominate the century to come. The Clash of Ideologies, 1910 to 1945. The first half of the 20th century saw a dramatic erosion of the old imperial powers and the birth of new republics across the globe. This was a period defined by widespread political instability and the two world wars that fundamentally reshaped human society. In the process of replacing the old European order, a wave of extreme nationalist and authoritarian parties emerged, and political thinking among the major powers became intensely polarized between the ideologies of fascism, communism, and the social democracy of liberal free market capitalism. It was an era where ideas were not just debated in salons or universities, but were fought for in the streets and on the battlefields, often with devastating consequences. The revolutions that sparked this massive shakeup did not actually begin in Europe. I see the start of this era in the decade-long Mexican Revolution beginning in 1910 and the Xinhai Revolution in China in 1911, which replaced the ancient Qing dynasty with the republic founded by Sun Yat-sen. However, the most influential revolutionary events of this period took place in Russia. After years of questioning politics and society under a repressive czarist regime, Vladimir Lenin led the Bolsheviks to victory in the 1917 October Revolution. Lenin understood that for a revolution to be successful, it required the leadership of a vanguard party made up of resolute individuals who could inspire the masses into action. He famously declared that politics begin where the masses are, believing that a united proletariat could transcend national borders to create a borderless, classless state. Yet, even within the socialist movement, there were deep disagreements about the nature of this revolution. Rosa Luxemburg articulated a different vision, arguing that the mass strike results from social conditions with historical inevitability, rather than being ordered from above by a professional vanguard. She believed that political organization would develop naturally from within the working class, and warned that the path Lenin was taking would lead to the brutalization of public life and eventually to dictatorship. Her warnings proved tragically prophetic, as the revolution was transformed into the personal dictatorship of Joseph Stalin. Stalin accelerated the transition to a socialist system through forced collectivization, arguing that wealthy farmers must be deprived of the sources of their existence. He framed the mass murder of millions as the liquidation of a class, and under his rule, the Bolshevik Party became a hulking, institutionalized instrument of terror. During this same period, Leon Trotsky elected to maintain a truly Marxist position, advocating for a strategy of permanent revolution. He grappled with the difficult question of whether the end justifies the means, suggesting that any action is moral if it ultimately advances the abolition of the power of man over man. However, he eventually found himself a victim of the very centralizing tendencies he had helped create, ending his life in exile, hunted by Stalin's assassins. He left us with a reminder that when the ends justify the means, one must always ask what justifies the end itself. While the East was grappling with the rise of communism, Italy and Germany saw the emergence of fascism. Giovanni Gentile, the foremost philosopher of Italian fascism, rejected individualism and argued for an all-embracing state where the law and will of the nation take precedence over individual will. He believed that all human and spiritual values must lie within the state, and that all individual action should serve to preserve and expand it. In Germany, Carl Schmitt provided a legal and political framework for this authoritarianism by focusing on the extrajudicial power of the leader. Schmitt famously claimed that the sovereign is he who decides on the exception, arguing that a ruler must be able to operate above the law in times of crisis to save the state. He saw the political sphere as an inherently antagonistic world of friends and enemies, and used his theories to justify the violence of the Nazi regime. In the face of these rising Bauquin, Winston Churchill emerged as a voice of non-appeasement. In the mid-1930s, when many European powers were following a policy of conciliatory diplomacy, Churchill warned that an appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last. He recognized that making concessions to a tyrant only makes them stronger while making the defender weaker. His radical but reasoned defiance, choosing war over the dishonor of a false peace, became the core idea that would eventually bring down the Nazi regime. The spirit of resistance and the quest for self-determination were also boiling over in the colonized world. In India, Mahatma Gandhi launched a campaign of civil disobedience that would change the course of history. He believed that non-violence was the first article of his faith and developed the method of satyagraha, or adherence to truth, as a purely spiritual weapon. Gandhi taught that we should meet our enemies with truth and love, arguing that the means used to achieve an end are just as important as the end itself. To the north, Mao Zedong was also looking to revolutionize his nation, but he drew a very different conclusion from his environment. Mao believed that in a semi-feudal society like China, peasants were the truly revolutionary class, and that military struggle was the only way to achieve victory. He famously stated that political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, asserting that in order to get rid of the gun, it is sometimes necessary to take up the gun. Other thinkers during this time were exploring the deeper structures of power. Antonio Gramsci, writing from a fascist prison, developed the notion of cultural hegemony. He argued that the ruling class maintains control not just through force, but by developing systems of thought and culture that reinforce their position through the consent of the masses. He saw the state as an educator and believed that the development of intellectuals among the working class was essential to counter this dominance. I also see the rise of movements for racial liberation and national identity. Marcus Garvey called for the 400 million Africans around the world to unite and liberate the African continent from racial oppression, promoting a sense of Black selfhood and nationhood. In Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta melded anti-colonialism with anti-communism, believing that the threats posed by Soviet influence could be as restrictive to self-determination as old-fashioned colonial rule. In Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk transformed the ruins of the Ottoman Empire into a modern, secular nation-state, driven by the belief that sovereignty is not given, but is taken by force through the sovereignty of the people. As the period drew to a close in 1945, the political lines of the world were being redrawn once again. The Allied victory over fascism led to a new standoff between the Communist East and the capitalist West, setting the stage for the Cold War. The first half of the 20th century left us with a legacy of extreme struggle and a profound understanding of how ideologies can both mobilize and manipulate the masses. We learned that while the quest for a better society can lead to extraordinary acts of courage, it can also lead to the darkest chapters of human history when the rights of the individual are sacrificed to the all-consuming will of the state or a single party. The ideas of these decades, from Gandhi's non-violence to Mao's armed struggle, and from the call for international revolution to the defense of national sovereignty, continue to haunt and inform our political landscape to this day. Post-war politics, reimagining freedom, justice, and power in a globalized world. The end of World War II did not simply bring peace, it ushered in an era of staggering transformation that forced us to re-evaluate every aspect of human organization. In the wake of such immense tragedy, the world needed new prescriptions for human development. I observed that this period was defined by the decline of great colonial powers and an intense ideological battle between communism and free market capitalism. While Western Europe developed a new political consensus through mixed economies and the modern welfare state, the shadow of nuclear weapons and the onset of the Cold War created a platform for a global collision of ideas. One of the most powerful voices in the immediate post-war years was Friedrich Hayek. He warned us that the chief evil is unlimited government. To Hayek, central planning, no matter how well-intentioned, leads to a road of serfdom, because no planner can ever possess the omniscience to account for the changing needs of every individual. He believed the free market acts as a spontaneous order, much like language, revealing knowledge through prices. His ideas eventually became the rallying point for neoliberal leaders who sought to roll back the state in favor of individual liberty. This focus on the individual was echoed by Ayn Rand, who promoted objectivism. She argued that there is nothing to take a man's freedom away from him, save other men, and that unfettered capitalism is the only system compatible with our rational nature. Robert Nozick later reinforced this by stating that only a minimal state, restricted to protection against force and fraud, can be justified. To Nozick, any more extensive state necessarily infringes on individual rights, and he famously described taxation as a form of forced labor. In contrast to this focus on absolute liberty, I find a profound alternative in Michael Oakeshott's skepticism of rationalist politics. He saw ideologies as a fog obscuring the practical art of governing. For Oakeshott, political activity is like sailing a boundless and bottomless sea where there is no harbor, and our best guide is practical knowledge rooted in history rather than abstract theories. The quest for social justice also took a central role in our modern debates, most notably through the work of John Rawls. He proposed that justice is the first virtue of social institutions. Rawls asked us to imagine a social contract designed behind a veil of ignorance, where no one knows their own social position or talents. In such a state, he argued, we would rationally choose to protect the least advantaged members of society. His theory provides the intellectual foundation for a capitalist system tempered by strong social institutions. The nature of power itself was reconsidered during these decades. Michel Foucault suggested that we need to cut off the king's head in political theory, meaning we must stop seeing power as something centered solely in the state. Instead, he showed us that power is diffused across microsites throughout society, such as schools, workplaces, and families. This concept of governmentality explores how we are controlled through discipline and the collection of knowledge. Noam Chomsky pointed toward a different kind of control, arguing that in modern societies, dominant institutions like the media and banks ensure that the rich folks are happy to maintain economic stability. He believes this concentration of power in unaccountable institutions makes meaningful dissent nearly impossible. I have also witnessed this period as a time of powerful voices for liberation. Simone de Beauvoir asked the fundamental question, what is a woman? She argued that woman is not a natural category, but a product of civilization, famously stating that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Her analysis of woman as the other compared to man as the subject became a catalyst for second-wave feminism. Around the world, movements for racial equality and decolonization challenged the old order. Nelson Mandela stood against white supremacy in South Africa, moving from nonviolent protest to armed struggle to achieve a democratic and free society. In the United States, Martin Luther King warned that nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance. He committed to nonviolence, believing that the moral purpose of protesters would be eroded if they turned to force. However, Malcolm X offered a different path, focusing on self-determination and suggesting that if the ballot did not work, the bullet might be necessary. In the colonial world, Frantz Fanon articulated the reality that colonialism is violence in its natural state. He believed that decolonization requires a total movement of the masses and the creation of a new national identity. Che Guevara echoed this belief in the power of the people to liberate themselves, championing guerrilla warfare in rural settings to topple oppressive regimes. Yet, even as these movements fought for independence, Jomo Kenyatta reminded us that communism could be just as restrictive to self-determination as imperialism, advocating instead for a pro-Western mixed market approach for a new Kenya. As we looked toward the environment, Arnie Nace introduced deep ecology, asserting that no natural object is solely a resource. He argued that mankind is merely part of a fragile ecosystem and that we must shift from a human-centric view to a spiritual realization that all life has intrinsic value. He believed that profound social and political change is the only way to avert environmental disaster. In the later 20th century, the landscape shifted again. Mikhail Gorbachev attempted to unite socialism with democracy through perestroika and glasnost, hoping to boost a stalled Soviet economy by increasing transparency and freedom. Although his reforms led to the breakup of the Soviet state, they signaled the end of the Cold War. In the Islamic world, thinkers like Abul Ala Maududi and Ali Shariati sought to eliminate un-Islamic systems and restore Islamic roots as the basis for society, while Shireen Ebadi argued that Islamic law does not actually require the violation of women's rights. Finally, our understanding of modern conflict has been shaped by Robert Pape's research on suicide terrorism, which he concluded is mainly a strategic response to foreign occupation rather than religious fundamentalism. This challenges us to think differently about international intervention. Meanwhile, Michael Walzer has struggled with the ethics of warfare, noting that the hellishness of modern war especially with nuclear weapons, often drives us to break with every restraint, requiring a constant reappraisal of what constitutes a just war. Looking back, I see that post-war politics is a complex tapestry of struggles for liberty, equality, and meaning. We have moved from the grand ideological battles of the mid-century to a more fragmented, globalized world. These ideas remind us that politics is an ongoing debate about how we should live together, and as new possibilities for power arise, so too must new demands for accountability. Our descendants will judge our common sense today just as we have judged the past, but the variety of theories we have explored provides us with the tools to navigate our uncertain future. If you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe button so that more people can know about it. Thank you for your support. Wishing you a pleasant evening and happiness with your family. Goodbye and see you in the next videos.